You get an earnings report. You get an earnings report. And you get an earnings report. Everybody gets an earnings report. I regret nothing about that introduction. Hi, I'm not a financial advisor, and yesterday on Wednesday, March 17th, also known as St. Patrick's Day, Sundial Growers released their fourth quarter earnings as well as their full 2020 numbers. And so today we're going to look at that. They released a press release yesterday, and I looked at it, and I'm like, I could make a video about this, pulling stuff from the press release, and it was very factual, and it would just be a lot of like me regurgitating like one-liners. So I figured, let's just go through the press release together. So that's what we're going to do. So when I snap my fingers, the press release is going to be on half of the screen, and then we're just going to go through it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And just like that, a seamless transition. So as we can see, it says the title of this report is Sundial Reports Full Year and Fourth Quarter 2020 Financial and Operational Results. So this is definitely a press release, and it's a little bit not cleaned up, so it's a little messy. So we will be jumping around, but I've already gone through it, so I already know the talking points that I want to talk about. One thing to note, though, is that all financial information in this press release is reported in Canadian dollars, unless otherwise indicated. So for those of you that aren't aware of what the current conversion rate is at the moment, I did check this, is the Canadian dollar is worth $1, and then the US dollar is worth around 0.8. So technically, every dollar amount that you're going to see in here that's in Canadian, which should be most of them, the actual United States value of that dollar will be significant or slightly lower. If you see $100 million in that's Canadian, so then in US dollars, that would be around $80 million, right? Fair? So if you see any numbers that seem inflated, that's because they're in Canadian. So first up, the press release basically just talks about some of the highlights, and they completed their financial restructuring and eliminated $227 million of debt in 2020, which I think we are all aware of. So they didn't pull the rug out from any of us there. I did make a video about how much unrestricted cash that they have on hand. That's actually quite the jump, and that's probably because of the capital that they were raising. So basically, end of 2020, they had 60.4 million, and then as of March 15th, they had 719 million. That's a lot more money than they definitely had 3 months ago. So that's good. Their gross revenue increased by 10% to 73.3 million. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but this company is technically still not making a profit, but the fact that their revenue increased is a good sign, right? That means that we're on pace to hopefully start making money. It says that their net cannabis sales increased to 75% from 2020. Their net cannabis revenue for the fourth quarter of 2020 was 13.9 million, which was an increase of 8% over the third quarter in 2020. I know that there's a stat about this a little bit later on that actually gives actual numbers, so I will definitely talk about that. Something else I will talk about towards the end of this video is the fact that they committed $58.9 million in the fourth quarter and a further $31.5 million subsequent to a year-end in strategic cannabis-related portfolio investments. So basically, they're just putting up money in investments, which again, there's a whole section that I will touch on. So they sort of broke this press release down into two formats in terms of like they gave whole year numbers for 2020, and then the second half of the press release they did fourth quarter only. And I know that this was technically a fourth quarter press release, but they also give the full year 2020. So we're just going to look at that, and then we're going to look at the fourth quarter. So as we can see, we're starting off with the full year of 2020, and it basically is saying that the capital that raised during the 2020 year provided Sundial with substantial financial resources to pursue operational goals and execute on strategic opportunities. So basically what that sounds like to me is that they were I don't know if they were intentionally or if they were planning on it, but just what ended up happening was they sort of used 2020 as a getting ready year. It didn't sound like they were making any moves. Granted, it was a pandemic, so I wasn't really expecting much, which is a smart thing. Like if you have the ability to just sit still and just position yourself, Yeah, that's not bad. Sundial continues its emphasis on premium inhalable cannabis because this is a weed stock company. And while Sundial expects the industry will continue to see volatility, the company believes that focusing on cultivation activities and inhalable products provides the best opportunity for long-term sustainable growth. And then one stat that I want to definitely make a note of is this one. It's the increased number of cases delivered monthly was 12,853 cases in January of 2020. And then in December of 2020, they delivered 24,847 cases. So they basically doubled the amount of cases that they were delivering from January to December. So in the 12-month span, they doubled. This bullet point right here actually caught me by surprise as I was unaware, I think. It says that Sundial acquired an expanded library of genetics in 2020 to better serve evolving consumer preferences, cultivate higher potency products, and generate better harvest outcomes. The company expects the new genetics will be on the market by Q4 2021. I'm sorry, they did what? They bought genetics? They bought genetically modified. I'm assuming that's what that means. Basically, it sounds like they bought a super plant, a super weed plant, which in theory could be very good for the company because now, granted, I know nothing about what it takes to actually grow and process a marijuana plant, and I don't know anything. I don't grow marijuana, but I would have to imagine that because it's a plant, each plant is different. While it's the same, but like they're all like slightly different. So I would have to imagine like maybe there's error on like how much cannabis you can actually get off of each plant, and so maybe these genetics are going to be reducing that number of errors. So like they're getting the same amount of cannabis from each plant. It's just a theory. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that seems like a pretty decent thing to invest in. And then the last bullet point I want to touch on was this one, was that Sundial was under indexed in the pre-roll format and increased production by over 200% in the fourth quarter and into 2021 to meet consumer demand. So the thing I want to focus on is increased production by over 200% in the fourth quarter and into 2021 to meet the fourth. So those last 3 months of 2020, they had to increase their production by 200% to meet consumer demand. I don't know what happened during those last 3 months that made everyone want weed, but they were not prepared for it and then got prepared for it. For those of you that aren't super familiar with Sundial and like their types of revenue, here are basically the things that they sell. They sell vape cartridges, dried flower, which I'm assuming is just like actual weed. There's like fresh, not fresh, but like weed to be rolled into joints or smoked, just free floating. I'm assuming that's what that means. Oil, concentrates, as well as edibles. That's a pretty basic spectrum. I don't really think you can get much broader than that with a plant. So it looks like they're trying to cover their bases. Something else that I wasn't also super familiar with was the fact that they actually have different brands. So not only Sundial, but they have Top Leaf, Grasslands, and Palmetto. Those are all the brands that they own and make money from. How the main one, however, is Sundial, which obviously brings in the most revenue at 16.5 million. Actually, no, Top Leaf also brings in 16.5 million. So look at that, Top Leaf and Sundial. Okay, here we go. Here's definitely something to keep in mind. Their net loss. So as I mentioned earlier, they are still not making a profit, right? They are technically losing money. So their net loss from continuing operations for 2020 was 206 million in 2020 compared to 142.7 million in 2019. Now I'm just going to quickly bring up my calculator on air, and because I'm not going to do this in my head, and 206 minus 142.7, dang it, 0.7 equals $63.6 million. That means that they lost $63.6 more million dollars than they did in 2019. I don't own a giant company, but I'm pretty sure you're supposed to try to lose less money than the year before. So this is just something to keep an eye on. Again, if you follow the stock, you should be familiar with the fact that they are not making a profit. So this is definitely something to keep in mind and keep an eye on. Okay, so those were the numbers for the full year of 2020. Now let's dive into the fourth quarter of 2020, which was basically October, November, and December. So their net revenue for the 3 months that ended on December 31st increased 8% over the third quarter from 2020. So their third quarter revenue was 12.9 million, and they increased it in the fourth quarter to 13.9 million. So basically just an extra million. Now, granted, all of these numbers are in Canadian, so it's probably not a million of US dollars. The other thing to note is their net loss for the fourth quarter. Their net loss was $64.1 million compared to a net loss of $71.4 million from the previous quarter. So this is a bit of good news, right? Much like, so technically they lost more money in 2020 than they did in 2019. But as far as quarters go in 2020, they lost less money in the fourth quarter compared to the third quarter. So in theory, we're making steps, we're making progress into the right direction. We're not out of the woods by any means, but this is just something to keep in mind. Now we move on to the liquidity and capital resources section. Through the combination of cash repayments, asset dispositions, equity and equity-linked issuances, and debt for equity conversions in 2020, Sundial has eliminated its entire outstanding debt while establishing an unrestricted cash position of $60.4 million in a term blah, 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 blah. Words. Basically, the number that we already knew about was the unrestricted cash balance is approximately $719 million. Sundial has engaged in several capital investments program in 2020, including eliminating their $227 million debt. In the fourth quarter, they issued 398 million common shares for a gross proceeds of $208.8 million. Trust me, we are all aware of how many shares you guys have issued. And then this one down here, I was a little bit confused about because I haven't heard of Sunstream Bancorp. Sundial entered into an agreement to form a 50-50 joint venture through a new corporation, Sunstream Bancorp Incorporated. The partnership will focus on cannabis-related opportunities and investments in Canada and internationally. So I have no idea who Sunstream is and where they came from. So if anybody has any information on that, let me know down in the comments below. Sundial remains focused on building sustainable, long-term shareholder value through the accretive deployment of cash resources while optimizing the utilization and output of its production facility. The key phrase here is long-term shareholder value. So technically, by them issuing shares, the short-term shareholder value got screwed. So therefore, they're focusing on the long-term shareholder value. And the last thing that I want to talk about is its strategic investments. Sundial continues to explore strategic opportunities to deploy capital with a focus on maximizing shareholder value. There's that word again, shareholder value. This strategy may include a potential merger, I like that word, or other business combination. So if you are familiar with what's going on with Torchlight and Metamaterials, if you watch my videos on that, that's a business combination. Direct or indirect investments in other cannabis companies in Canada, in the United States, and internationally. So then why not just say the world? Why do we got, that's what that means, right? Selling limited quantities of inventory at or below cost, entering into long-term supply agreements with other licensed producers, licensing or strategic transactions, or any of the combination of the foregoing. So basically, this whole paragraph right here is talking about what Sundial hopes to do strategy-wise with their investments to hopefully make more money and grow the company. Now, again, this was a lot, I'm aware. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link this press release in the description of the video so that you can go and take a peek at it, go and look at the stuff that I didn't cover, that I didn't really think was important to the stock price at the moment. It's just more or less important to the company. This is basically the end of the press release. They give a COVID-19 update, non-IFRS measures, and this is basically the end of the press release. So if you guys have made it this far, I appreciate it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the stock. Now, the stock didn't quite pop as much as maybe the options market was projecting it to at around 27%. Last time I checked, the stock pretty much only moved around 10% after hours. But based on this press release, I didn't get any bad news aside from the fact that the net loss increased. But, I think that we kind of figured that one out. So let me know your thoughts on Sundial. Are you still holding? Are you still bullish? What did you take away from this fourth quarter as well as all of 2020? And as always, I will see you guys next video.